Further now, do some analysis on the line for us is Professor Bonita Meyersfeld. She's from Wits University to talk about what all of these crime statistics mean to us. Prof, good afternoon. Would you say the police minister will be satisfied with these statistics?
I can't speak for the police minister. I mean, I think that statistics always need to be viewed as what they are. They're an assessment, they're an adjudication, and I think that we can see them as some type of barometer of how things are in society, but they're a barometer with flaws.
How are you seeing these statistics?
Well, it's less about the actual statistics for me and more about the approach of the government in response to those statistics. So, for example, I think it's terrific that the statistics demonstrate a decrease overall. That's clearly, we're delighted about that. I think there are two seminal questions. The first is that decrease sufficient? And the second is, what is the government's response to the crime as it stands? And in respect of sexual and gender-based violence, the government's response is very clear that although they record a decrease, it is still a prolific rate of violence against women, especially sexual violence, and that this has to be addressed.
Police minister alluding to extenuating circumstances like the police being distracted by service delivery protests. Can these be seen as valid reasons?
Well, that I think is a complete counterexample of an appropriate government response. That's appalling. Service protest delivery is of course demonstrating violent trends, but that's not a distraction from the national priority and needs of the citizens and people living in South Africa. There's very much core to it. So if we have sections of South Africa where the population is marching and demanding that their voices be heard, that's not a distraction. That means that cohesively we're not doing the job, or government is not doing the job that it's supposed to be doing. So I think it's absolutely inappropriate to say that we're not attending to crime A because poor people who are hungry or who need water and sanitation or who aren't receiving the services that are promised to them in the Constitution are getting angry. I think that's a very big mistake.
We did hear something about a long-term plan being more of a focus than the short-term delivery. What kind of plan would that be?
So I think that any plan that the government is producing is, one has to be a bit realistic about election time. And what we really have to start asking ourselves is, what are we expecting from a government and a party and a regime? And what are we expecting as a national collective? And the national collective, for me, it was very interesting after the Anine Booysen torture, rape, and murder that occurred earlier this year. There was a very clear national collective voice, wasn't there? That national collective gave a clear indication that this is not the country we want to live in, and this is not what we're about. We are not this level. We do not propose or endorse this level of violence. So in many ways, the government response to the crime stats is the linchpin to a much wider discussion around what we think is satisfactory for ourselves as people living in South Africa.
Prof, there is also the question from the SAPS's side. They've had some pretty bad press recently, morale probably a bit low. Do you think this has impacted on their service delivery?
Well, absolutely. It's interesting. There's no question, absolutely no question, that police services in this country have deteriorated. I think it would be a nonsense to argue otherwise. But again, it comes down to the reaction. If we're going to pretend that our police services have focused on specialized crimes, that our police services have engaged properly with the real needs of South Africans and people living in South Africa, if we're going to suggest that there's no problem, then I think you're going to find a public that is very disbelieving. But if, however, you turn around and say, yes, we've had a really horrid time, and I don't think that horrid time is simply because there are naysayers who would like to demonize police service people. I think it's because there's been real problems. And those problems are as a result of two sects of problems, if you will, two categories. The first is because there has been a deficiency in leadership. Practically, we've had a revolution, as in a revolving door of leaders in the police services over the last few years, they have seen change after change after change, and with each individual coming and going, leading this services, you've seen a change in the priority. And I think that policing services have become more about protecting those with power and less about protecting those without. And I think that's a categorical shift in policing that we've seen that needs to be addressed. But there's a second reason why policing has seen the type of deterioration, and that is because of the way police service people are treated, trained, and remunerated. Think for a moment about how much police service personnel are paid. Possibly one of the lowest paid service providers in the country, together with teachers and nurses. And then you stand back and say, well, what are our key social evils at the moment? What are our key social problems at the moment? Well, it's violence, health, and education. So we've got to ask ourselves, what are we valuing? Are we valuing, and by value I don't mean some esoteric notion of personal beliefs or morals. What is economically valued? What do we commodify? So is it appropriate that our police service personnel, especially the ones who are facing the daily risks, are paid such a paltry amount of money and receive training and debriefing that is not commensurate with the needs of South Africa? I think that's some of the questioning we need to be asking as well.
Professor Bonita Meyersfeld, thank you for your perspective this afternoon. A pleasure to talk to you from Wits University.
News that moves. eNCA.com.